Hello everyone, and welcome to the third online event of the University of Leicester's Breaking Barriers Refugee Week 2025 on the topic of supporting higher education in Palestine, 1 year on. My name is Aleks Palanac and I'm Head of Sanctuary Seekers Unit at the University, and I'm very pleased to be chairing this event on this important topic, which will be focusing on what the University of Leicester has been doing over the past year to support Gaza at this time. I'm going to be joined by a number of colleagues who I'll be introducing as we go along. So before we get started, I'm just going to run through a few housekeeping points. So please use the question and answer function to submit any questions that you might have and also any comments. You can do this at any time during the webinar, but the speakers will be tackling those in a section towards the end of the webinar. We're going to be recording this session for future use. It's going to be put up onto our YouTube channel, and all attendees and people who have signed up to the event will receive that in an email afterwards. And if you do have any other queries following this session, please email sanctuary@le.ac.uk. Okay, so let's start with a bit of context, which many of you may be familiar with already if you've been following developments over the past 16 months of genocide in Gaza. So since its inception, higher education in Palestine has been repeatedly and systematically targeted by Israel in what has been termed by Professor Carmen Nabulsi as scholasticide. And since October 2023, all 12 higher education institutions in Gaza have been destroyed or severely damaged. So that's not just university buildings themselves, but their labs, other resources, libraries, archives, museums. So that the means not only of teaching and learning, but also the means of knowledge production itself. You'll also be aware that there's been widespread killing, mental and physical harm, displacement of students, academics and staff, and unsurprisingly, higher education for a while ground to a halt. There's been huge barriers to education and knowledge production during this time. And you're probably also aware that in contrast with other recent crises, such as those in Syria, Afghanistan and Ukraine, UK government support has not been forthcoming. Okay, next slide, please. So this lack of political willingness to help, coupled with rhetoric about moral and political complexities about this situation, has created what has been called a chilling effect, whereby individuals and organisations that might typically be moved to speak and take action were instead largely silent and immobile. And even the university's sanctuary community was almost completely silent up until February 2024. So I decided to write the following email to the Universities of Sanctuary Dismail community, urging them to mobilise for Gaza. So I'll just take a minute to read this out. So our sanctuary community has been very quiet on this issue, and it's high time for us to come together to take meaningful action, as we did for the people of Ukraine, Afghanistan and other contexts of conflict and persecution. In the words of UNRWA's Commissioner General Felipe Lazzarini in May 2023, the plight of Palestinian refugees remains the longest unresolved refugee crisis in the world. More than ever, they require our collective solidarity. As a University of Sanctuary community, solidarity is at the heart of what we do. I therefore call on our community to come together to discuss what actions we are best placed to take to provide meaningful support to Palestinian students, teachers, academics, and the higher education system. So following on from that, we started to take action to move the discussion forward about what we as a sector could do to help and to explore various possibilities. So one of the things we did was at Breaking Barriers Refugee Week 2024, we held a webinar similar to this one, but we were exploring different options, including the project that Shameq is going to talk about in a minute, And we heard from Professor Sayeed from An-Najjar National University in the West Bank about a scheme called TESI. So we explored various different initiatives, and then after that we worked with the team at Universities of Sanctuary to put together a guidance document to detail different ways in which UK universities could provide support to students, academics, teachers and higher education institutions in Gaza. And also in this time, we have been making links with many different organisations and groups and initiatives to explore what can be done. We then went on to set up various initiatives, which we'll explore a little bit later on in this session. And we shared this on a new Gaza support webpage on our website. Next slide, please. Then after that, in May 2024, there was a significant development. So the heads of the three largest public universities in Gaza, the Islamic University of Gaza, Al-Aqsa University and Al-Azhar University, issued an unprecedented call to the world. So again, I'll just take a minute to read this one out. So this is called the Unified Emergency Statement by Palestinian academics and administrators of Gaza universities. We have come together as Palestinian academics and staff of Gaza universities to affirm our existence, the existence of our colleagues and our students, and the insistence on our future in the face of all current attempts to erase us. We call upon our friends and colleagues around the world to resist the ongoing campaign of scholasticide in occupied Palestine, to work alongside us in rebuilding our demolished universities, and to refuse all plans seeking to bypass, erase, or weaken the integrity of our academic institutions. The future of our young people in Gaza depends on us and our ability to remain on our land in order to continue to serve the coming generations of our people. We built these universities from tents, and from tents, with the support of our friends, we will rebuild them once again. So this powerful statement reminds international actors to centre the needs, wishes and voices of staff and students at Gaza's universities at all times. They go on to emphasise the need to support the universities to enable them to continue to exist and to function. Next slide, please. So let's move on to think about ways in which we've been thinking about supporting Gaza's universities, students and academics, bearing in mind this important call from the Emergency Committee. So as you might be familiar with the fact that it's a core requirement of Universities of Sanctuary to put on scholarships for Sanctuary students, usually based within the UK, and usually these are campus-based scholarships. However, although this might be familiar to many UK universities, how can we reconcile scholarships with the call from Gazan universities to support institutions? So that's one thing that we've been grappling with over the past year. And also, how can we tackle additional challenges such as that of travel? So how can students who are currently inside Gaza physically travel to take up a scholarship opportunity which might be outside Gaza? Equally, a student might be based in another country like Egypt or Qatar, and there might be lesser kind of travel issues for students based in those places as well. Kind of struggles to get visas and travel documents and things like that. There are difficulties for Gazan students accessing documents, references. There's limited internet and electricity, difficulties with accessing and taking English language tests, and difficulties with accessing some sort of safe pathway to the UK. And I know that Maxim and Jacqueline in a minute will be exploring some of these challenges in more depth. So one thing that we needed to do then is to try to get our heads around all of these additional challenges which we hadn't really faced before when setting up other scholarships, and also thinking about what opportunities might already exist for students from Gaza. Next slide, please. So these are the four main scholarship schemes that we have been exploring and engaging with. So the first one is the British Council HESPAL scheme. So through this, universities partner with the British Council, and the British Council have a number of partner universities across Palestine. And those universities put candidates forward for master's and PhD programs as a way of building capacity of those Palestinian universities. So this is a good model of providing UK campus-based scholarships in a way that also supports the capacity building of Palestinian institutions. So this seems to be very much in line with the call from the Emergency Committee. Another type of scholarship that we've been developing is an in-house Gaza Sanctuary Scholarship. So the university management agreed to put on 3 masters and 1 undergraduate scholarship over a 3-year period. And we had some challenges when it came to trying to figure out how to advertise this or how to promote this among students in Gaza, and also how to help people be able to meaningfully apply for these opportunities and take these opportunities up if they were successful. So this is where the Gaza Scholarship Initiative came in as a sort of mediator organisation, and you'll be hearing from Jackie and Maxim in just a minute about how that system works. Could you go back one slide, Julie? Okay, and another scheme which we've been developing is Distance Learning Sanctuary Awards. So this is something which we offer to sanctuary students who might be based anywhere in the world in various different regions of conflict or in third countries. So these are basically master's degree programs that students can take by distance learning through the University of Leicester. We have had some students from Gaza and from the West Bank applying for these scholarships. And what we're currently doing is looking at some of these degree programs and seeing whether, because of the additional challenges that students, particularly in Gaza, are facing in terms of accessing internet, electricity, devices, we're looking at whether we can actually adapt some of the materials of those mainstream distance learning master's programs to make them more suitable for people who are in a current crisis context. So basically watch this space. We're developing that at the moment. And finally, another scholarship type of scheme which we have developed is called the Displaced Student Initiative. And so this is a study abroad style on-campus mode of study for medical students from areas affected by conflict. And a little bit later, you'll be hearing from our colleague, Professor Shameq Sayeed, who has developed this and who will be able to outline more about this. Okay, next slide, please. So now I'm really pleased to hand over to Jacqueline, Shoen and Maxim Sansour, who are both amazing volunteers at the Gaza Scholarship Initiative, who've been really instrumental in developing that scheme and maintaining that scheme, and have put in I don't know how many hours and weeks and months of work to support the development of that and to support individual students to make it to the UK on scholarship schemes. So yeah, I'm going to now hand over to Jackie and Maxim to take you through GSI.
Thank you, Aleks, for the introduction. Thank you so much for having us today. And thank you to Leicester University for all of the critical work that you've been doing and to support Palestinians in Gaza. I also want to say welcome to everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. My name is Jackie, and this is my colleague, Maxim. We are both volunteers with the Gaza Scholarship Initiative for Displaced Students. This initiative is a coalition of volunteers, in fact, that have responded to the need for students in Gaza who would like to continue their education, but who have been unable to do so because of the destruction of the education system, higher education system in Gaza. And we formed last year in February, and it initially started from a group from an organization called We Are Not Numbers. And this organization had been going on for a long time, and it's still going on, it links aspiring Palestinian writers to English-speaking mentors in the United States who would work with each writer to publish their work in Western media and to tell their story. And when the invasion happened, when the Israeli invasion started, the students who had been working with our mentors the mentors were asking the students, what can we do to help you? And all of them said, we just want to continue our education. We don't want to stop studying. We want to finish our degrees. And so we have responded to that call. And our first cohort came from the We Are Not Numbers organization, the aspiring writers that we were working with. And so they had very high levels of English and were high achieving students. And so the first few, we reached out to, because the coalition includes professors and writers and artists and from all walks of life, really. And we started reaching out to universities, asking them if they could set aside some funding to support a student from Gaza. And once one university in the United States did that, then we were able to start partnering with more universities because they felt comfortable working with us and our students. So our initiative aims to safeguard Palestinian futures by securing full scholarships and other forms of support for students from Gaza. Can you please move to the next slide? Thank you. So as Aleks had mentioned before, most of the higher education institutions in Gaza have been destroyed. So GSI addresses these issues. Next slide, please. And Maxim's going to go ahead and talk about the challenges they're facing the students in Gaza.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. As Aleks mentioned, I'm from Palestine, but based in Britain. I'm from Bethlehem, and I've been working with Jackie since February or March 2024 on this. And Aleks started talking about the challenges that face students, particularly as they are now they find themselves in a situation where many of them can only think of studying abroad and having to secure a scholarship abroad. But there's so many huge barriers for them to get these opportunities. So I'll go through them and I'll try to describe each one a little bit in terms of what has happened in the last year to that challenge. So inability to travel, as we all know, Gaza's sealed. And apart from very few injured people had not been able to leave. Lots of the students that we work with, that we managed to place abroad, were students who managed to evacuate before May 2024. But since then, the Rafah border crossing has been closed. And students, even though they have received full scholarships, admissions, and visas, they're still stuck in Gaza. When they apply for scholarships, when they apply for admissions to programs, then another challenge they face is that they cannot access language testing facilities. These facilities have been destroyed. They can only do the tests on their mobile phones, which you can imagine is very difficult. So we try to also help them with that by giving them codes to Duolingo, by agreeing with universities on alternative testing mechanism. The third thing is that, of course, there's very limited internet. So throughout the period of the genocide, there's been students have really had very intermittent internet, which means that if they even try to apply to something, it will drop off and they lose their work. There's lack of access to computers. People have had to evacuate their homes, they've had to flee, and they got displaced. Most of the people left with nothing but their phones, so they don't have their access to laptops from which they can study, from which they can apply, fill out an application forms. They also have difficulty obtaining documents. So the academic institutions themselves have been destroyed, so there's nowhere to go to ask for your transcripts, etc. More tragically, a lot of the professors, their references would have been killed or displaced or imprisoned. But I have to say, over the last year, one thing that we have found quite impressive is the degree to which these Gaza universities have managed to continue and maintain an online presence. So a lot of the documents that we have obtained for different students on their files are actually from the online systems that these universities miraculously, really heroically, still continue to maintain, which again talks about how important it is to support these institutions. Next slide, please. There are lots of financial challenges as well, and one of them that particularly we face with students coming to the UK, or we're trying to place in the UK, is excessive visa fees. And this is something that not all universities cover, unfortunately, unlike Leicester University, which did cover them, which we were very grateful for. But a student applying for a master's degree, a student has been accepted to a master's degree in the UK, even if they have a full ride scholarship with everything covered, they might still have to face two big expenses. One is a £490 visa fee that's non-refundable, and another one is the health surcharge, which for 1 year of a master's program is £1,164. That's about 1,600 plus pounds that the student would have to either find from their own pocket, or we would have to fundraise to allow them to do that if the university doesn't offer that. They, of course, have extreme financial duress, these students and their families, because even if they had come from comfortable backgrounds financially, they would have spent a year and a half of in utter disarray, and they would have spent, a lot of the families would have spent all their resources and savings, and they have so restricted access to work. Their works are disrupted. Also, their education has been disrupted, so they often have to, when they apply, they have to explain the gaps in their education, and also they have to ask for their credits to be transferred, and they have to and often they have to restart from scratch, as we saw in some cases in Ireland. Finally, and very importantly, and maybe often estimated, is the mental health challenge that faces these students. These students under a huge traumatic stress. Complex trauma, as some of our mental specialists call them, and they have to yet manage this terrain and manage to apply and find the right way for them to get out while going through that complex trauma. And knowing all this is where GSI is trying to try to support these challenges as much as possible, to kind of create a bridge for the student to get to the universities that offer the scholarships. Next slide, please. So Jackie, you want to do this one? About what exactly are our objectives at GSI?
So now, after we are now currently working with about 300 students. We have them on our lists, and we have placed a number of them. And so we've developed our objectives over time, and so they've come down to the following: to secure scholarships and university placements and provide academic and other support for displaced Palestinian students from Gaza, to cover travel, visa and other fees, tuition, room, board, living expenses, and other forms of support. Our objective is to streamline the process, to consolidate applications to universities and scholarships, to avoid students being accepted to universities but not receiving the scholarships needed to attend. So oftentimes the student will have to apply for a scholarship and send an application to a university. We try to consolidate that process so that there's less paperwork and less time spent on trying to get these students placed in different schools outside of Gaza. And that's been a huge help, because with all of the challenges that Maxim mentioned, between Wi-Fi, not being able to access documents, being displaced, and having mental health challenges, the streamlining the process has been a huge help to both universities and the students. We also want to assist students in renewing their passports, which has been a huge effort on our part. It's been very, very difficult to do this sort of thing, especially now. Somehow it's more difficult. And again, helping them gather their documents, reaching out to the institutions or the people, supporting the students, and putting together their references and their CV. We also work on evacuation. This has been a big topic as of late, especially once the ceasefire took hold. However, at the moment, and we keep having hearing different things, that we always need to be prepared to help them evacuate, but that at the moment, no one's being evacuated. So this is a big challenge at the moment, but we do have a running list of students who are ready to evacuate, and those who have placements at universities can get on that list, and they have a much better chance of getting out once evacuation does take place. So it's important that they have secured a scholarship and they have a letter of acceptance from the university, and then they can go on that list. And we share that list with our partners so that we can all work together to try to get these students out of Gaza to start their programs. And as Maxim mentioned before, the students that did make it out in May last year are the ones who are currently studying. They're in the United States, they're in the UK, they're in Ireland. We also, as Maxim mentioned, we work to ensure mental health support. So we have a whole team of volunteers who support the mental health of these students. And that's been a huge part of our efforts because it underpins everything else. And we've had to come up, this team has had to come up with new ways of working with these students because they are being continuously traumatized, and that trauma has not stopped. So they've not been able to process the trauma. It's ongoing. So for those who did evacuate, they would get out, and then they would have the adrenaline to keep them going, and then there would be a big come down after 2 weeks where they would start having survivor's guilt, leaver's guilt, and having not been feeling like they're experiencing the same thing that their families are currently going through, and so that's been a challenge. And then of course, adjusting to university life in a different location where most people don't understand what you've just been through or what you're going through is a real difficulty on the part of the students to also have it to continue their studies. Next slide, please. We also raise funds for evacuation and incidentals and whatever universities aren't unable to cover. We raise funds for these students. We are experiencing more and more challenges on this. We are asking universities to provide full scholarships because we don't have the capacity or the funds to do a lot of the support that we did in the beginning. There's such a great need for students, and we don't have the funds or capacity to support them with that. So we try as best we can, but we are asking universities more and more to offer full scholarships. And one of the challenges we have is that the universities will often take care of the student once they arrive. But again, as Maxime said, not the visa costs, but also not the travel costs, and then the travel money that they might need in getting to on their travels to their destinations. We also provide legal support and advocacy. We're developing this area in the UK, but we have a very solid kind of core team in the United States who have helped us up till now in advocating for students who were unable to get visas and supporting them as they've gone to their interviews and arrived to the United States. And we also, we provide wraparound care for these students. So we are fully involved with each and every one of our students on a daily basis. We all have personal contact and relationships with these students. So we aim to provide wraparound care so we know what they're going through at all times, and we make sure that there's a volunteer or more than one volunteer to greet them once they arrive to their destination. We help them get to their universities. We invite them to stay at our place if there's a few days until they can get into their housing. So we do that and that's a big help to the universities because most universities cannot provide that level of support. And that's where the volunteers come in, where we can actually be there for the student and help facilitate them getting to their degree programs. We also assist and collaborate with initiatives working to restore and rebuild Gaza's education sector. So this is an area of development. This is something we also really want to focus on. We do want to support higher education in Palestine, and until higher education institutions in Palestine are able to take on more students, we want to fill in the gap, the very small gap that we're trying to fill. And we also we don't leave the student once they start their programs. We are with them the entire time, and we also try to help them. We want them to return to Gaza to help rebuild Gaza after they graduate. So that our goal is not to keep these students out of Gaza. Our goal is that they would ultimately return to Gaza and to their families where they are needed. Next slide, please. Okay, I think time.
Yeah, so maybe quickly to wrap, to describe a little bit our students. We've been working with around 300 plus students who are on our list, intake list of candidates for different programs. Like Jackie mentioned, that most of them came to us. The first cohort came to us with this program called We Are Not Numbers. They are special students in that we have contact with them from earlier through different means, and so let's say they are in a sense curated group of students who we know their academic credentials very well. So they, for example, would be have higher than average GPAs in Gaza. They would have ranked some of the top members of their universities. They've received very high end of high school education exam results, the Tawjihi. They'll be very fluent in English, which is quite a huge requirement in the obviously for managed to, especially if you're doing an MA in the UK. So the candidates that we present to universities, we know that our candidates who are able to pursue the degrees that are being offered. Next slide, please. So in the last year or so, particularly in 2024, we've managed to place 103 students, more or less, because sometimes these numbers are changed as we add on more students. But we've managed to place them in full scholarships or other kind of educational program. We've managed to place them in 35 different institutions and in 10 countries. A lot of them are in the USA. We have 4 in the UK, 5 in Ireland, Spain, Turkey, Palestine, Egypt, Jordan, South Africa, and Malaysia. In terms of UK, we actually have 5 places, but one was not issued the visa. We're working on her to come this year, September. In Ireland, we have actually 17 scholarships. Only 5 managed to make it. We still have around 12 students who we expect to come in September if they're allowed to come out to evacuate. One thing we have to say here, that in the last few months we have started to and why this is particularly so important for us to be in this session is because we're trying to shift focus away from the US and towards the rest of the world, and particularly towards Europe and UK, where we're based, in Ireland, because we are very concerned about the prospects and future of our students in the USA, given what's going to be clearly aggressive restrictions on particularly Palestinians and Muslims to be studying and functioning in the USA. So we're trying to reach out as much as possible to universities. And in recent time, we had a bit of, we really have a big push. We're going to have a big push in Ireland soon. We've had a big push in the UK, and we're continuing. We've recently got LSE promising 3 scholarships. We have we'll continue to, of course, to work with Aleks in Leicester. We have Birmingham University also coming along, will also offer more scholarships. So we are very hopeful that we will continue the momentum to offer more and more scholarships. Next slide, please. There have been, of those scholarships that have been secured so far, 60% have been undergrad, 31% have been masters, and 9% are in the medical field. Here to say one thing is that we've noticed that a lot of the, especially the new scholarships that we secured in the UK are from master's programs, and we're kind of in desperate need to shift the balance a bit to have more undergraduate scholarships. And we realized that a master's program is a 1-year financial commitment by the university. A BA is a 4-year, much like 4 times the cost. So it's easier to offer MAs, but the problem is that we do have a lot more BA students candidates than MA students. So we're very much trying to reach out to universities to offer undergrads. Next slide, please. Unless we have more time, I think we'll stop here. I had just had the examples of some of our students, but I think you got the idea of our of what we do, and we're very open to questions, and hopefully we can work with you. And thank you again.
Okay, thank you so much to both of you and to all of the other volunteers as well that have created this amazing network, the Gaza Scholarship Initiative. It's such a brilliant initiative, and it has met a real tangible need. It's really helped to facilitate the take up of these scholarships. So yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to hear from Professor Shameq Sayeed, who has set up a fantastic initiative at the University of Leicester Medical School to support Gaza medical students, as well as medical students from other crisis contexts. So I'm going to pass over to Shameq now.
Thank you, Aleks, and thank you also to Maxim and Jacqueline and yourself, Aleks, for setting out the kind of context that we're describing here. So some of the things that I'll be touching upon, they'll be revisiting some of those themes. But if you can go to the next slide, please, Julie. The text on this is probably far too small to see, but I think it's kind of the broader context. We've touched upon Eddie's side and Scholastic's side and the kind of current situation and the challenges within education. But I mean, for those of you listening, I'm sure you'll be well aware of the wider context. Often the mortality figures are quoted, you know, this, and Aleks had asked me to present last year, so this is 1 year on. And just look at my presentation from last year, there have been almost 20,000 more people killed since last year. And those numbers, as we all know, are a massive underestimate. I mean, let alone the direct trauma. I mean, these are kind of deaths through trauma. That itself is an underestimate, as we know, because of numbers, thousands estimated still to be lost within the rubble, but also what the Lancet has called indirect deaths, and has estimated those, the Lancet being kind of a well-known medical journal within the UK, has estimated those deaths to be conservatively probably at least 4 times what we're seeing here in terms of these numbers, 200,000 plus people because of the destruction of healthcare infrastructure, sanitation, chronic disease and so on. These are numbers which just aren't being recognised when we're seeing with the numbers that we're seeing, which are devastating enough. That's mortality and injuries, the attacks on healthcare itself. Aleks touched upon people, you know, healthcare workers, for example, being killed, again, 1,000 plus. The devastation is at every level within Gazan society, and this is why I think what we're talking about here, higher education, is so important, because it's a part of what will contribute ultimately to the rebuilding of Gazan society. And likewise, and if we go to the next slide, please, Julie. One of the reasons I guess I'm focusing on medical students is not, it's not because anything else is any less important, it's just because it's what I know. And I think, like a lot of people at the start of this in October, and for me, I've been working between the West Bank and Gaza since about 2011. We knew what was coming was going to be pretty devastating. I don't think any of us realized just how devastating it was going to be. And I think there was that feeling of helplessness and wanting to do something. I guess for me, it was trying to do something within a sphere of medical education that I knew, you know, a little something about. So this initiative started with a focus on medical students, and specifically on medical students who were displaced externally to Gaza. This is about 10% of the 2,500 medical students in Gaza between the 2 medical schools, the Islamic University of Gaza and the Al-Azhar University. And in the early days, this was the kind of logos that you can see here of the 2 universities, but at the bottom there, Oxpal is a student staff group in Oxford, which works with the medical schools across Palestine, and they did some fantastic early work just gathering data on students who were displaced outside of Gaza. And Palmed Academy is a group of, Palmed is a group of expatriate Palestinian doctors across the world, and they came together to basically form this virtual, almost proxy university online to help support the 2 medical schools whilst they got themselves back on their feet. So as you can imagine, not only were the universities physically destroyed, but their servers went down and so on. So there was even online learning wasn't possible in those earliest days. The 2 deans that you can see pictured there on the website snapshot on the right have been leading this initiative in discussion with colleagues from across the world. And what I'm going to be talking to, of course, is, like I said, the displaced students, the 10% or so who are externally displaced, but of course the vast majority remain primarily internally displaced within Gaza. And these deans have been doing an incredible job just supporting the ongoing studies, not just of those who are internally displaced within Gaza, but also those who are externally displaced. And that, despite everything that's going on in Gaza, just a few months ago, the final year students from the medical schools went through their final year exams and have incredibly managed to graduate despite everything. Next slide, please, Julie. So just a few slides on kind of barriers and potential solutions. This again, just the images I think here are really telling as well. The top image there is the auditorium that was used for graduation. The bottom image is the same venue. And again, it's just the range of buildings that have been destroyed. I mean, universities, we're talking about universities, but we've talked about healthcare infrastructure briefly as well. But you know, mosques, churches, bakeries, homes. The UN estimates about 92% of housing units or homes have been either partially or fully destroyed. I was speaking to one of our Gazan students who's on our Displaced Student Initiative. And sorry, I haven't spoken much about our Displaced Student Initiative. Let's touch upon that last year, but I will touch upon it briefly here as well. And she was saying in previous wars, those who returned to their homes to find them intact consider themselves lucky. And she was saying that her home, her family home, the windows have been blown out, but actually they consider themselves lucky because the majority of people don't have homes standing anymore. And you know, this time around. These barriers, I'll run through them on the next slide because I've got the solution associated with them as well. But before we jump to the next slide, sorry, probably helpful just for me to briefly touch upon the Displaced Student Initiative that Aleks has very kindly introduced. And you've heard from GSI the incredible work that they and others are doing. And in the early days when we were trying to develop this initiative for medical students, we were looking at developing a similar kind of scheme, helping students to transfer over from those who are externally displaced to transfer over to medical schools across the world to complete their medical degrees in those hosting universities. The main issue with that, of course, was that if we were to do that en masse, it would basically mean that the home schools would lose these students. And of course, a school without students, there's no school at all. You can't run a university without students. So fairly rapidly we pivoted to a model, and for other reasons as well. Also in the UK, there's no accreditation of prior learning in medicine, so you can't start from second year or the third year. You have to start all the way from the beginning, reapply and so on, and go through the medical degree right from the very beginning, whatever year you've come in from. So for various reasons, it wasn't a good idea to have students, or it wasn't possible to have students transfer over. So the model that we developed was in discussion with Palanac Academy and others, and initially we did this with universities in South Africa, medical schools in South Africa, was to host these students in discussion with their home schools, almost like medical students across the world. They go on an elective period, normally in the penultimate or final year of the medical school, to experience medicine as it might be elsewhere in the world. Normally it's quite kind of a happy time for a medical student where they're coming towards the end of their studies and they get to experience medicine in different settings. We basically used that model that medical students across the world travel to other medical schools and created an extended elective model where we would host students for as long as was required for them to complete the rotations that were required for their clinical placements. Because clinical placements, if you're displaced, you can't do those, of course, in your home school. And as I was saying earlier, and as you can see in this image on the slide now, despite everything in Gaza, those clinical placements were continuing for the internally displaced students. That damaged building there on the right is Dr. Anwar, who's the Dean of the Islamic University of Gaza, teaching during this current war. But for the externally displaced students, those who were in Egypt or elsewhere across the world, they had no such option to continue their clinical rotations. So the idea was to host them in discussion with their home schools to continue their clinical rotations, to be assessed remotely and or on site through volunteer faculty, to meet the requirements of their home schools such that they could progress and ultimately be awarded their degree from their Gazan school, from their home school, whilst being hosted by schools like ours in Leicester, or schools in South Africa, Turkey, and elsewhere, which are taking part in this initiative. So the barriers and solutions, just to finish up, the barriers are there in black. The solutions I'll talk to briefly, and again, many of these have been touched upon already by Aleks and GSI colleagues as well. So the academic colleagues, the academic solutions, sorry, were many. I've listed them there, and it was working very closely with the deans of the homeschools to work through them. So progression, initial discussions as to how students would progress if they were being hosted by one school and running per their curriculum, whilst they had to meet the requirements of their homeschool. So a particular challenge for these students is that they're having to basically study towards 2 curricula simultaneously. Medicine's challenging enough. These are bright students, of course, but to have to study towards 2 curricula simultaneously has been a lot of work for them. And one of my roles within the University of Leicester is to basically act as their link tutor between their homeschool and us as a host school, to try and ensure that we're minimizing that burden on them as much as possible. Assessment, how are these students to be assessed? I mean, they're with us, being hosted with us. Do they sit our assessments, and then do their schools recognize that as sufficient for progression from one year to the next? Do they need to sit their homeschools assessments remotely? What about the clinical assessment? Because that can't be done remotely. So these are all questions that we've been exploring, and now we think have found solutions to. But ultimately, when these students graduate with their home schools, with their Gaza schools degree, will that be recognised by medical bodies across the world? And the GMC very kindly reached out to me just a few weeks ago to kind of talk through exactly this. If these students were to want to come to the UK to train, would their medical degrees be recognised, given the fairly non-standard approach that had been taken to them completing their medical degrees? And I think, just like we did during COVID, and we accepted that under exceptional circumstances, we take exceptional means to help students continue their studies. One would hope that this would be recognised as an equally exceptional circumstance. I was quite reassured by the GMC to hear that actually they've long had situations like this, even in normal circumstances. A lot of students, for example, in America study in the Caribbean and then go to America to complete their studies in normal circumstances. So it's kind of split study. It was reassuring to hear. It's not unusual in any way. These circumstances obviously are. Pastoral, again, Jackie's already touched upon this. There are issues here that, for me as a non-Gazan, somebody in the UK, I can't even begin to understand. And in addition to having the kind of pastoral support that we normally offer to our own medical students, we were very keen to ensure that they had an ongoing connection with their home schools to help facilitate the pastoral side of things in whatever way was most helpful for them. Language, thankfully, hasn't been an issue for Gazan students. They study, their medium of education is primarily English in medical schools. It is an issue, of course, with displaced students from other parts of the world. Ukraine is a good example where the medium of education there is Ukrainian, so it's more challenging there to be hosted by a school, for example, in the UK. But this scheme more broadly, the way we foresee it is that host schools generally will be those schools which are nearest geographically and culturally to the schools that they are hosting on behalf of, because that generally means that a greater alignment of the medical curriculum, the medical education system, and often language and culture as well. So displacement, as jarring as displacement is going to be, it's hopefully ameliorated some small amount by that cultural and language similarity. Host capacity, we've as a university, we've committed during this pilot just to these 2 students that we're hosting at the moment, but the idea is to take 2 or 3 students for each academic year, so 2 in the first year, 2 in the second year, and so on. And we'd hope, and we're speaking to other medical schools across the country at the moment, recognizing that hopefully that wouldn't be asking too much from a capacity perspective, and similarly with universities across the world. Financially, it's been touched upon. I mean, massive barriers there, and the model that we're approaching is basically local support for students that are being hosted locally. So in Leicester, I'm looking locally in Leicester, or more broadly in the UK. In South Africa, there's a charity, Gift to the Givers, which is funded entirely the logistical aspects of travel and accommodation and so on for these students. The regulatory barrier is probably the greatest. Again, it's been touched upon. And institutionally, if we can overcome the institutional barrier, which we've now started to do, even then, as colleagues have already touched upon, the national barriers, visas in particular, are perhaps the biggest challenge. And Aleks has already spoken to this, but our approach, entirely appropriately, as that we took with Ukrainian refugees, and perhaps to a lesser extent, but still there with Syrian and Afghan refugees, less so perhaps even still with kind of with Sudan. We're not really seeing that level of support, unfortunately, with students or with refugees from Gaza. If anybody saw that exchange, that horrendous exchange in Parliament a few weeks ago, where Keir Starmer was being blamed for supporting a Palestinian, or for the Home Office supporting a Palestinian family to abuse the Ukrainian refugee scheme to seek refuge. I mean, it feels a very, very hostile. Maxim touched upon the hostile environment in the US. I'd like to think ours is less hostile, and almost certainly is, but there are similar examples, sadly, in our setting as well, which Aleks has touched upon in terms of government support. And again, I think that's a matter of us just continue to speak to and lobby our MPs and the government, hopefully to try and see some flowing of that. Next slide, please, Julie. This is just a slide to show the degree of, and again, as I've touched upon this has to be done in partnership with colleagues from, locally, nationally, and across the world. So obviously being led by and being guided and directed by our colleagues in Gaza and the schools in Gaza, working with organisations that have been working like Oxpal, Palmed, have been working with medical schools in Palestine for a long time, and then these are the kind of universities in the middle there, Cape Town, Witwatersrand in Joburg, Pretoria, so 3 universities in South Africa. And then Oslo University took some students for a couple of months as well. Rawalpindi Medical University in Pakistan has taken about 97 medical students and about 47 dental students. And Leicester is piloting this initiative currently with 2 medical students. A couple of universities in Istanbul, and then the Al Khidmat, Gift of the Givers, Al Quds Fund for Medical Foundation for Medical Schools in Palestine. These are all charities which are supporting the work from a financial and logistical perspective as well. Next slide, please, Julie. So that's a very rapid run through from me, and very happy to take questions at the end as well. This, for those anybody who's been to Gaza, this Al Khaldi Mosque, I think it was called, was a beautiful mosque, and like I was saying earlier, many of the mosques and churches in Gaza have been destroyed, and it's colleagues who I was going to with Gaza in the past have been back since, and every time we've been back after a war, we've seen the devastation, but it's as I was saying earlier, and as I'm sure you all know, and as I've heard and seen, to what limited extent we've been able to see, given that journalists haven't been allowed into Gaza, it is on a whole different scale today. So I think any little that we can do in this regard, and here we're talking about education, we hope is going to be of some benefit now and longer term into the future. So that's all from me. Thank you, Julie. I'm happy to take questions now or via email later as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Shameq, first of all, for developing such a wonderful initiative, and also for coming today to share your insights about it. Okay, so we're going to now move on to think about to look at some of the other initiatives that we've been working on. So next slide, please. Okay, so another avenue that we've been exploring as a university is that of fellowships. So we've been working with the Council for At-Risk Academics for many years, and we were in the process of placing a fellow from Gaza in January 2024, an academic called Dr. Wissam Essa, who was an eminent geographer from Al-Aqsa University, but he was tragically killed by an Israeli airstrike before he could travel to Leicester. So we are now in the process of talking to CARA to see if we can find a Gazan academic who might be able to come to our university to take up a placement. And we're also looking into the prospect of remote fellowships as well. This is something that a few universities in the UK have been looking into. So this would be for academics who might still be located in Gaza, and this would help them to sustain research and to build capacity whilst still staying with their home institutions. That's another avenue that we're exploring at the moment. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and we've also been able to leverage our experience and our networks in the area of academic English provision. So we run the Refugee Network, which is a network of English for academic purposes practitioners who are looking to develop pathway to higher education provision for refugee background students via English language routes. So we've put on a couple of webinars which are focusing on ways in which we can link with Gaza or support students in Gaza directly. We've been able to, through that network, we've been able to place a couple of Gazan students last summer on pre-sessional academic English programs via distance learning at a couple of UK universities. And there's a really powerful blog post by one of those students who's called Ibrahim Al-Dalis that you might want to check out afterwards. We've also made some online trauma training available. So this is something that's relevant to anyone who's working with refugee background students in English language teaching, general or academic. But yeah, many people who are working with Palestinian students have been accessing that resource recently as well. And we've also started to put together an ELT for Palestine Padlet with lots of different resources and links to training sessions and guidelines for people who are working with students who are based in Gaza or who are from Gaza, or who want to find out more about how they can fundraise for various initiatives on the ground there. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and I'd like to also give a shout out to our student body at the University of Leicester, especially societies such as PALSOC, who have been tireless in their organising to raise awareness about the genocide, apartheid and conditions under occupation. They've been raising much needed funds for Gaza. They've been ensuring that Palestine is present in university spaces, in our conversations and in our hearts. And I'd also like to say a heartfelt thank you to those students, because they've been giving us hope in dark times and they've been holding us to account and challenging us to do better. Next slide, please. So looking to the future, as well as continuing with the initiatives that we've outlined already, we have two main priorities going forward. So one of them is we're currently in contact with the Ministry of Education and Higher Education in Ramallah in the West Bank. And we're going to be working closely with our colleagues there to see how we might best link up with Gazan universities to provide the support that's needed. And another main priority is to revisit what it means to be a university of sanctuary. So this is a task not just for us, but for other universities across the sector. For example, critically examining the contribution to forced migration push factors that our universities might be having through certain investments and partnerships, and reflecting on our role in offering solidarity as a part of sanctuary. And so this is really a conversation that we need to take forward as a sector, and it's one that we started in a session that we ran for Breaking Barriers Refugee Week on Monday, which was called Beyond Welcome, Sanctuary and Solidarity. The sanctuary movement needs to evolve to be fit for purpose and to tackle the crises of the moment. And Gaza challenges us to rise to the occasion now, and with a level of clarity and urgency that we've never seen before. So by the time it comes to next year's Breaking Barriers Refugee Week, let's hope we can be reporting back on a shift in our thinking and our practice. Okay, so I'm going to now hand over to Pascal.
Thank you, Aleks. All right, so I think we have a little bit of time to go back to some examples of students. So I will just give me a second. We'll just go back to the right slide, and I will pass back over to Maxim and Jacqueline. And meanwhile, feel free to post some questions or comments in the Q&A. Just as a reminder, this is there for you. Just a little second. All right, over to you, Maxim and Jacqueline.
Yeah, well, thanks again, everyone. And Shameq, it was very interesting to hear your presentation, and really look forward for us to connect further, because I think, as mentioned, we are getting more and more students who are interested in the medical field, and this is an area that is very different from other scholarships. It's a very different, and it's a very complicated world to maneuver if you don't understand it, which we don't. So we really look forward to some guidance from you, and maybe we can collaborate. And this was a bit that we weren't sure we have time for, but maybe it's actually quite appropriate to end with this, because it's more to bring a more human side, although we've shared all these human tragedies and photos, but maybe it's kind of zoom in on the students, that their actual lives, these humans who are going through such horrific circumstances. So can we have the next slide, please? So I'm going to go through 5 students who we've helped place in in the UK and in Ireland. So starting with Asil Musa, who's at Leicester and who Aleks knows very well. She studied she has a bachelor in art in English literature from the Al-Azhar University in Gaza, and she was a reporter. She wrote for so many, for Al Jazeera, for Electronic Intifada, for The Guardian, very much for The Guardian. She was a very prolific writer and a journalist. She is a prolific writer and journalist. And she's managed to get out, and she's now at Leicester University, and she's completing a Master in International Relations. Soon after she arrived, I got to meet her at the train station here, and we met her again. Wonderful lady, and she recently won an award, the Rory Peck Award, for her writing. So again, just to give you an example of somebody who's, despite all the trauma they're going through, they're still focusing on their dreams and their aspirations. They're still working very hard to do something special with their lives. Next student, please. Atta, who Aleks also knows, but he's at the University of Birmingham. We met Atta a couple of times, Jackie and I, and he's one of these people who you meet and you realize this person is going to be one day an ambassador for Palestine. Somebody who's exceptionally well-spoken, who when you're in his presence, you realize you're somebody who's very calculating, very thoughtful about his life and what he wants to do and what he wants to achieve. Also has a bachelor in accounting from the Al-Azhar University in Gaza, and worked in a lot of kind of public policy roles as a volunteer and otherwise in Gaza, and now is doing an MA in global conflict and cooperation. Recently, we've worked with, we discussed and conversed with Atta about his dissertation topic, and he's very much focused on the rebuilding of Gaza. So I think, I don't know what he decided, but that's his thought, is how to rebuild Gaza, a whole academic study on rebuilding Gaza. Next student, please. Muhammad al-Zubda, and this is, if we get into the medical field. Muhammad studied in Gaza, graduated Bachelor of Medicine from Al-Azhar University. He evacuated to Egypt. He worked with his friends and his fiance on setting up a system that receives injured Gazans into Egypt, and how they're taken care of, and how they transfer to medical treatment abroad or in Egypt. He came here recently to do some placement, I guess the observership.
Elective period.
He did a short period at the Free Royal Hospital, and we fundraise for that, and then we managed to introduce him to friend doctors of ours at the Imperial College, and he's now doing a second elective training at the Imperial College of London. This is one of our only experiences of medical students in the UK, but hopefully with speaking to you, Shameq, we can expand on that. Next slide, please. We're moving to Ireland. Faris is a wonderful student from, also of course from Gaza. He graduated with as a nurse from Al-Azhar University in Gaza. He went through a horrific period. Soon after he graduated, he found himself working at the Al-Shifa Hospital, right when the Al-Shifa Hospital was under siege. And he had a very traumatic experience that he's actually writing a memoir about. But in that, after he had to evacuate the hospital, he managed to evacuate from Gaza, and he got a place in a full scholarship at Trinity College in Dublin to study a Master's in Global Health. We speak a lot to Faris, wonderful person who's doing very well, and all of them, not only are they doing well in their studies, but they take part in so many Palestinian events and represent Palestine at universities and elsewhere, whether it's in the UK or in Ireland. And last student, please. Zaid, he's probably one of our youngest students, but also one of these people who is just remarkable for his academic achievements. He's just about 19 years old. He got 99.1% in his Tawjih exam. I think it was the second highest result in Palestine for his year. He's very interested in computer science, in AI, in computer gaming, and he's now studying at the South East Technical University in Ireland that offered 3 full scholarships, and he's doing really, really well. And the only complaint I've received from his supervisors is that they're worried that he's spending too much time on his studies. So these are the different kinds of students, and it is really remarkable when you speak to them how they've managed to survive that trauma and yet be so focused on the future, to still feel hope in the future. Next slide, please. Of course, these are the, let's say, the lucky ones who've managed to take their opportunities. But we have so many other students. Is it 35 students or plus who are still in Gaza? Yeah. Who 35 students around who have full scholarships, full documentation to study abroad, but who cannot get out and take their place. The most have been deferred to September 2025, and hopefully they'll take it. And one of them example is Abdullah. He's also in Gaza, and while he's stuck there, he's been busy organizing educational programs for displaced children. Again, remarkable stories everywhere you go. And that's it for us. I think that's that. Next slide. Yeah, next slide, please. Just, I guess, the last note, if people want to hear more from us, want to connect with us, if you can please see that the email scholarships@gsids.org. If you can email us, we'd love to hear from you. And the more we connect with people, the more that our understanding of what other people are doing, what can be done, develops. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was really great that we got a chance to hear about your students, and I've seen that we had the comments saying how wonderful it was. So we had one comment earlier. Just a reminder, if you do want to post any questions, please use the Q&A function, and we will take a few if we have time. Just a minute as I transition. All right, so I will read the comment we've received, which invites some thoughts. So you may need a minute to take it in. Congratulations for your passion and wonderful initiative. This is extremely valuable and will undoubtedly grow and evolve. It is also important that it remains focused. Without offering any words of wisdom to the most challenging injustice of modern times, the context is different, in my opinion, to what it was even a few weeks ago. From the moment that even a superficial ceasefire was in place, Palestinians will be facing history of a pathway to sovereignty, which Israel knows full well, and ongoing killings and destruction. Therefore, no matter how small a program, initiative, even topic, it is crucial that that is explicitly, preferably not implicitly any longer, linked to a future Palestinian state rather than previous support to a just cause and suffering people, which my generation failed to grasp. Any thoughts? And congratulations again from Panos. Anyone wants to share some thoughts? Yes, Aleks.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of give a few thoughts in response to that and then pass over to Shameq or Maxim or Jackie if they'd like to add something. But yeah, thanks very much, Panos, for that comment. And I totally agree. And I think that kind of chimes with the statement from the emergency committee of Gaza university heads who were basically saying a similar thing, like to centre the voices and the needs of Palestinian people and institutions and their vision for rebuilding, rather than externally imposed visions, which might be a sort of form of neo-colonialism in itself. And I think one of the things that comes through in their statement is that the moment that we kind of give up or say that there are no universities remaining in Gaza is the moment that we kind of make that happen, because then we stop looking for what they are actually doing, the ways that they are trying to kind of rejuvenate themselves, the initiatives that they have managed to miraculously start up again in very, very difficult conditions. And so, yeah, what they're asking for is funding and for support to go directly towards them and towards the priorities that they themselves have laid out for the future of Gaza universities in, well, quite possibly and hopefully a future Palestinian state. So yeah, I think for me those two things resonate. But yeah, I mean, would Shameq or Maxim or Jacqueline like to come in with any further thoughts on that?
So, yeah, happy to say just a few words. I think, Palestine, thanks for the comment. And the question. It's a really difficult one because, exactly as Aleks said, I think this always has to be centered on what Palestinian colleagues want to do, and this is where we're always driven and guided by them as to what they feel. And this is the work that I've done in the West Bank, likewise in primary care development. It's always been guided by the Ministry of Health in that setting. I guess I touched upon this when I was presenting as well. The reason we're so keen to support colleagues in higher education, both students and staff in the institutions themselves, is because ultimately these, like other institutions within a state, they will form the basis of what ultimately will be the future Palestinian state. So I think if these things are lost, and of course this is almost certainly why there has been what can only be seen as a concerted effort to destroy these very institutions of state. I mean, hospitals pose no risk to Israel. I mean, universities pose no risk to Israel, but by destroying them, you're destroying the very fundamentals of what would ultimately be a future state. So for me, I mean, as I was saying earlier, it's just working within the context of what I know, which is medical education, to try and support colleagues in Palestine as they feel best.
Maxim, Jacqueline?
It is a difficult question because, yes, of course, we are, I think, all of us and the students that we work with and talk to always are not only aspire, but kind of assume in our hearts that we're all working towards a Palestine, a Palestinian state, a Palestinian autonomy of sorts. Obviously, in the day-to-day of our work with the students, we're focused on more human issues to each one and to their families and so on. But it's hardly ever devoid of this idea of that it's about Palestinian steadfastness, it's about survival, it's about our survival not only as individuals but as a community that have the knowledge to rebuild and to regroup and to build a nation in the future. So in a sense, these are, for example, when we look at the students we deal with, we feel sometimes that instead of kind of these terms sometimes that are absolutely correct in some circumstances of saying something is a brain drain, for example, this sometimes feels like a brain rescue, that we are safeguarding the brightest of our community, our youth, for them to continue their education instead of regressing or faltering, so that they will be the ones to rebuild Palestine one day. So in that sense, I don't think that the issue of rebuilding Palestine is absent from in the background of any conversations we have, whether it's as us or with the students.
Thank you very much all for your comments. Okay, well, it's almost time to close this event. So before we give you our thank you to everyone, we just wanted to share the next events, part of our Breaking Barriers Refugee Week program. So tomorrow we have an event focusing on Ukraine support 3 years on. So we hope a lot of you will join us, as this is also so relevant right now considering recent changes. And then on Friday, we'll have the return of Researching Refugeedom, where we'll have 3 talks of researchers. So we also hope you can join this. Finally, this is not part of Breaking Barriers, but we would like to invite you to take part in this Literary Leicester event. And we will share the detail when we email all attendees after Breaking Barriers has finished. But this is Voices from the Other Side of Hope, Writing as Activism, which will take place in Leicester in person at the Attenborough Arts Centre, which is also part of the university. So a massive thank you to our speakers, to my team in the background for helping me run this event, and to our attendees for making the time, and I'm sure busy schedule, to join us for this really important event and sharing such beautiful initiatives. Have a lovely day, everyone, and we hope to see you tomorrow at our next event.
Thank you very